Did you ever think you'd become a promoter?
Never, never. Um, no, I'm really interested in the creative aspect of wrestling. And as you know, even our time together in TNA, I loved working with talent, promos, vignettes, all. It's like, that's very much like music in its own way. It's like how to cook a soup. How do you want to play this? The nuances involved. The promotional side is, in my rock and roll life, somebody else sells the tickets, you know what I mean? And they blame me when we don't sell tickets, but you know what I mean? Like, but somebody else does all that. To be a promoter was like a totally new skill set to have to learn. And then much less being a promoter for the oldest wrestling promotion in the world. That's bizarro land. But here we are, I was willing to take all that on, my efforts to buy TNA, and then my eventual acquisition of the NWA brand had everything to do with the fact of like, look, if I want to work in professional wrestling, there's only one way it's going to work, and I'm going to have a lot of control. We make this joke around the office sometimes, which is, WWVD, which is what would Vince do? You know what I mean? Because there's just certain things that you have to almost be inside the office, understand the promotional thing as it pertains to the booking. And there's no manual for that. Most of the people who are very successful bookers had fathers who were bookers. You know what I mean? They grew up in the business. They understood the kind of the difference between, let's call it the reality and non-reality of professional wrestling booking. I had no training. I had no particular mentor. I learned, much like I learned music, by listening and watching.
Well, how much did growing up in Chicago form your attitude toward everything?
Well, it's a combination of things, and I appreciate the question. On the fundamental level, hard work is something that when you grow up in Chicago, hard work is just a part of life. The first time my band would go to Chicago and LA, they would make fun of us because we worked too hard. Like, oh, you're in a rock band, you should like be partying more or something. And we were always kind of like, huh? It didn't make sense to us because we grew up in a working class city. Right. Now combine that with, as your co-host mentioned, the AWA, that physical presentation of wrestling, the very sort of larger than life, but very physical and very real. Vern Gagne, of course, had much to do with the way that wrestling was presented in Chicago. And why did they bring Vern into the professional wrestling business in the 50s? Well, word was getting out that it wasn't real, and they felt they needed to bring a bunch of shooters in like yourself to create legitimacy about the product. And Vern ushered in this new era in the 50s of, let's call it hyper-realism about wrestling and toughness. Not just tough, but like truly like a shooter tough. And so, that's what I grew up on. So if you had a brawler like Bruiser, but then you had a shooter like Gagne, right? And then you had these larger than life characters like Von Raschke, who was playing a Nazi from Milwaukee, So, if you look at the NWA, it dovetails very well with what I saw as a child on television. But then, of course, when you add in watching Georgia, obviously Crockett's heavily had a lot to do with that. You put those two pieces together, you can pretty much see what the modern NWA is built on. And one last thing, when people give me weird stuff about, let's call it modern wrestling, 2023 wrestling, it's like telling me I don't know what rock and roll is, right? It's like, no, I know what wrestling is. You might like something different.
That's right. A different flavor.
Yeah. You might like different flavor. Totally cool. And then, and I'm sure we'll get to Dave Meltzer in a second, but when even people try to imply to me that I don't like, high flyers, when I don't like high-level Japanese style, they don't know anything about me. When I would go on tour with the band, I would go out of my way to go see CMLL in Mexico and go see lucha shows. I would go to, All Japan or whatever when I would be in Japan. I love all of wrestling. But at the end of the day, it'd be like saying, because I play a certain type of music with my band, I don't like other types of bands.
Right.
It's so weird to me. It's like, no. I know what I want for myself, and I know what I want for the NWA, but it's not a diss against anybody else. In fact, I would argue as a marketing exercise that you want to be different than everybody else. Who wants to be sub WWE or sub AEW or sub anybody? That's like, That's antithetical to the way my brain works. I want to be the best NWA. And then you take the best NWA and you pit it against everybody else, and then you make your call. But being sub any, I mean, is Kurt Angle sub anyone? That's so stupid. Why would you? Who wants to win the silver medal? It's like, that's the opposite of the way that I was raised in Chicago.
Right. We like different flavors. Some people like chocolate, some people like vanilla, some people like strawberry. And I think you nailed it there.